computer. Hi, so I'm here today with Andrea Heinz. Thank you so much, Andrea, for joining me. I'm really glad you agreed to come on my YouTube channel.
Thanks for having me.
Andrea is exited from 7 years in Edmonton's licensed sex trade. She also was a dominatrix, a travel companion, and did out-call escorting. Andrea's been out for 8 years and is now married with 3 kids. And she holds a diploma in correctional services and is in her 4th year studies toward her Bachelor of Professional Arts in governance, law, and management. She's also in the process of making a docu-series and of writing a book, and a lot of other things which I'll let her discuss more. So let's get going. Andrea, hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you, Paul.
Yeah, I'm really glad you decided to come on the show. And before we hit record, I was asking you why you want to do this interview, and essentially you believe that it's important to have these conversations in our society and our culture. And my YouTube channel is sort of, the mission is to it's sort of like have the conversation society should be having and isn't. Like we have all these giant elephants in the room, and the reality of not only widespread ubiquitous pornography use among almost all males in the population, and its ties to pornography, sex trafficking, exploitation, objectification of women, human rights. I see that all as like this one big thing under one big umbrella, right? And so I'm really excited to be able to talk to someone like yourself and kind of niche down into this very specific kind of manifestation of sexual exploitation. And in a conversation, I'm hoping that we can actually kind of feel out what get a feel for articulating some of the bigger issues behind, what you did, because, you can just tell me the story, I did this, this, and this, but, I'm also interested in why does this exist, and why is this a thing, and why do men pay for sex, and how do you relate to each other in that process? Is there a price you pay emotionally or psychologically? Like all of these things. So sorry, my head's just swimming like crazy right now, but so many questions. So why don't we start with walk us through, and go back as far as you need to, your childhood, your teenage years, or whatever. Walk us through how you got into the sex trade.
Sure, thanks. So it's really quite a long story, and I know that we don't have 4 hours or 5 hours, so I will try to keep it short.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite characteristic of many women's stories. There tends to kind of be 2 narratives that dominate when we're discussing about women entering into the sex trade. And one is the very, very tragic story of childhood sexual abuse, childhood neglect, poverty, extreme childhood poverty, just all those types of precursors to severe vulnerability. And then the other is more so what I call the mainstream entry now, which is what we're seeing, in my opinion, what I'm noticing that we're seeing more of now. And that's more so a byproduct of sex work ideology, the normalization of the commodification of women's bodies and of our sexuality. So I would consider myself to be more of the latter, so a byproduct of that social conditioning and that grooming. But I did obviously have a few little things in my childhood that I think differed a little bit more than the average person on that side. Really, for me, it was growing up in an oil patch town in Fort MacMurray, Alberta, which is about 5 hours. Yeah, you've heard, everyone is like, oh, Fort MacMurray.
Yeah, Fort MacMurray, the oil patches and the oil sands. Okay.
Yeah, lots of money, lots of drugs, lots of transient, lifestyles. And so really every parent there was just trying to do the best that they could do, to afford housing and to, take care of their kids, but also working typically these 12-hour shifts out at the oil sands, which are almost an hour north of Fort MacMurray.
That's so your parents, you mean, or you're referring to your parents? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it was really every kid I grew up with. Every single one of us were daycare kids, or we were latchkey kids. Very few of us ever had stay-at-home moms. Everybody was doing the the 12-hour shifts, moms and dads. So that left a lot of time for me to just, spend watching TV and kind of just being in that world, and seeing a lot of things that, back then we didn't have parental locks on TV or like channel locks, so what was on TV was what you saw.
So,
And
so just to give context, you're as a teenager, the 90s?
yeah, so I was born in 83, so I'm 38
Okay.
now.
Oh, okay.
So this would have been like kind of late 80s, early 90s,
Right,
which is
right.
sort of when we started, I think, to see that shift. It was coming
Mhm.
off of women's liberation, which was great, the women's sexual liberation, but it didn't, in my opinion, kind of stop where it should have. It just went way too far to a distorted level. So I think for me, that was a big part of it was, I always say this, was watching much music or like MTV, all these music videos, and seeing that hypersexualization of women at a very young age. So particularly Madonna, that's always the one I go back to. And a
Mm.
lot of women my age say that as well, that was really the groomer was TV and music and media.
So just to kind of like expand on that a little bit. So the height, so you're a young impressionable teenager that's learning, like you're basically at that age where your prefrontal cortex is absorbing everything from around you in your environment. And part of the shaping force of our culture is the music industry, let's say let's say music, entertainment in general, maybe the fitness industry, pop culture, right? So you're seeing women, you said the hypersexualization of women is what exactly, and how did you like internalize that? Like, did you look at that and go, wow, she's really hypersexualized? Or did you watch a bunch of videos and say to yourself, why is the emphasis on women's breasts and buttocks? And why, like, what was happening?
At the time I was completely clueless to it. I was just
Yeah.
sucked and swallowed by the conditioning effect of it, that I didn't have any critique of it, any ability to step back and kind of say, what am I watching? Like, what is happening here?
Yes.
It was just taking it at face value. And so every music video in the late 80s, early 90s was the crop tops and, the big hair and
Yeah.
the low cleavage and the tight leggings.
The leggings, yeah.
Yeah, and even like you said, fitness, that was a big part of it too. Like I've been, an athlete my whole life, and growing up, I used to watch even just like, the Jane Fonda workout videos.
Yeah,
and
the 20-minute workout and all that stuff. Yes. Yeah,
all
yeah.
that kind of stuff on daytime TV. And even the women doing the workouts were always in these really tight sports bras, these really tight leggings. And you wouldn't really see the same with the men that were in these same fitness programs. But at the time, again, I just didn't look at it as anything abnormal, because it was just everywhere around me. Every ad I saw, every TV show I watched, every song that I heard had some type of, at that time, still quite a low level conditioning of sexuality. Like, it's not what we're seeing today, but it was enough that it definitely had an impact on me and steered my life in that direction, I think.
Okay. So walk us through teenage years and then, as a young woman.
So that was probably more so like my childhood and preteen years. And I really didn't have any exposure to pornography or anything like that, honestly, until I entered the sex trade at 22. I don't recall ever watching any pornographic film or any content in that regard until I entered the sex trade. But there was always like the evening movies and things like that. And I think, Gabe Deem had talked about this on one of your episodes too, just saying, he was just watching TV, and once you got cable, all of a sudden you're seeing little snippets of this. And so I think when everything kind of added together, it sort of made me think to myself, that is the role of women, is to be sexual, to be hypersexual, and to center men and men's sexual desires. And that will be what will make me valued as a woman. That will give me, credit in the world, per se. And that was really just, I think, the struggle that then led into my teenage years of, promiscuity, dating. My sister used to say boyfriend of the week, because every time I would just, it was just happening where I just couldn't kind of stop what was happening, I think. And So yeah, very, very challenging, but I was a pretty good teen, I like to think, because again, I was a competitive karate athlete.
Okay.
So that kept me pretty grounded when a lot of my friends were getting into cocaine addictions, crack addictions,
Okay.
doing a lot of ecstasy, acid, mushrooms. And I think every kid living in a remote northern community dabbles in that stuff, but I always was very fortunate that I had that grounding of my fitness and my athleticism to kind of keep me off of that. So not every person gets that. I was fortunate in that regard, but it still was always kind of in the back of my subconscious. Dress
Yeah.
sexy, be
Yeah.
sexy,
Yeah.
fall for men.
I just want to come back to something you said and restate it again, because it's so incredibly succinct and powerful that I don't want people to miss this. And you said something like, my identity became centering, correct me if I'm wrong, my identity became centering the man and his attention and servicing, or no, you didn't use that word servicing, but sexual desire.
Mhm.
The sexual desire or pleasure of the man is center. And that
Yeah.
was your role? Did I say that right?
I feel like that was how I identified the role of
And-
womanhood
Right,
and
right,
young womanhood, being a
right.
teenager. And I would look at other young girls that weren't taking the time to work on their body or look sexy per se.
Right.
And I would kind of look at them like, oh, you're going nowhere in life, or oh, you're not going to ever get a boyfriend, as if that was sort of the base level of success that a woman could have, would be how well she is physically and sexually received by male peers or by the men in her life.
So
So
I'm curious, as you start to become aware of this, probably as a teenager, I can present myself in such a way as has been modeled to me by, let's say, MTV. I can present myself in such a way that it's highly likely I will get the attention of the male, and I have utility in terms of how I can present a sexual reward to him in a sense. And then I'm guessing that there was a positive reinforcement for you where that did actually work out, where you did get a lot of positive male attention. Would that be
yeah,
true?
yeah, I would say so. And
Hmm.
the ironic thing is, I wouldn't say it's positive male attention, right? Like
Well,
it's
talk about that. Yeah, because I hear guys say to their teenage daughters, like, you can wear that out of the house, but the attention that you're going to get may be from the kind of guy that you don't really want attention from.
exactly. Yeah. And that's so true. So true. Like I think whenever you're young and you're uncertain about who you are and you're very impressionable and you're still trying to come into your own, any attention, it seems like you think it's good attention. And we see that with even young male peers too, right? Like with those young men, they'll hang out with gang members, they'll hang out with, unsavory older male teens just because
Right.
they're giving them some degree of attention. But what that younger boy doesn't see is that he's actually being manipulated or used by that older man or that older boy. So it's the same thing with women too, but ours just seems to gravitate towards male attention rather than female. Whereas I think with men, they gravitate towards that older male identity. But like I didn't care what any older teenage girl thought about me. I was hyper fixated on boys, and I think a lot of young women are when they're coming into puberty, but it seems to be not so much attention that we're paying to boys, but like dedication that we're giving to them, where it's like, I will give everything I have to get that attention from you instead of just doing my thing. And like
Mhm.
you said, hoping that you'll get the right attention from the right person.
Well, and I'm wondering, when you say it that way, is this coming from a deficit? And I don't mean that in a critical way. Is it coming from a deficit in your own psyche of, not having attentive, nurturing, present, positive male presence growing up? Like you talk about your dad being away 13 hours a day. Where, like, I'm wondering, were you close to him and did he give you that positive attention? So is this trying to overcompensate for that? Because you described like really dedicated to getting this attention from guys, like this became almost like your purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was very fortunate. My father is a wonderful man. He was never abusive with me whatsoever. He was always my biggest champion, saying, you can
Okay.
do it. You're capable. Like
Okay.
that's great. But as much as I love my father, he is also still a byproduct of patriarchy, right? As so
Mhm.
many of us are, men and women. So I think there was still some underlying tones in there where it was still like there was the role of the woman and there was the role of the man, and the two shall not pass or cross. But I think, you know, a lot of men, even if they buy into patriarchy, they tend to want more for their daughters or see their daughters as somehow different. And
Okay.
my father was definitely that way too. So as much as he could recognize all these things, he always told me, you can be better than that, you can do better. But we know that, you know, especially with middle school aged girls, there is just a huge drop that happens at that age of self-confidence with girls. And it's right in that, you know, prepubescent age when our bodies are starting to develop. And again, we're starting to be noticed by boys, we're starting to notice boys, and we haven't really navigated that territory yet to know how to navigate it. So that's where we have that vulnerability of just looking for that acceptance and all those things. So I think for me, that was just typical as well too, was right around grade 7, grade 8. I probably had a dip in my self-confidence because I just wasn't sure about that transitioning into
Mhm.
womanhood from
Mhm.
girlhood.
Mhm. I'm curious, did you have the input of, I mean, you mentioned your dad that was sort of very supportive, but did you have input from a mother, an aunt, a cousin, a peer that spoke into your life and encouraged you to also focus on finding value and identity in accomplishments rather than in your who, you know, which guy you were going out with or that kind of thing? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I definitely did have that. Like my mom, it's funny because she's like the feminist traditional wife. My
Okay.
mom, yeah. I always kind of take a jab at her because I'm like, you're a trad wife, you know, like she was the woman that still did all the cooking, all the cleaning, tended to the children, made the lunches, did the homework, all that kind of stuff, even though she was an equal breadwinner with my father. But it, again, that was that patriarchal time, and
Mhm.
still is now, where there was the men's roles and there was the women's roles. So my dad did all the grass cutting, all the, you know, home repair stuff, but we know
Right.
that that's not as much typically as all the home maintenance stuff with cooking and cleaning and childcare.
Right.
So my mom always, I think, planted those seeds and did set a good example for me in that she worked the Monday to Friday job and then did all those things too. So I remember just idolizing her as a child and thinking like, I want to be like that, you know, I want to have it all. But I
Right.
think what I didn't see was the burnout that comes with that on women. So I
Yeah.
think my mom did all that she could to set that foundation of saying, you know, focus on goals, like you said, rather than attention from people.
Mhm.
But again, when you're young, it just goes in one ear and out the other. It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
hard to cement those ideas and those characteristics in kids, I think.
So okay, so take me through. I'm really curious how you went from a childhood that was, like you say, not, you know, you weren't living in poverty. There wasn't sexual abuse. You had two parents that, yeah, they worked a lot, but I mean, they were there. They had input into your life. What so walk me through the thought process or the key events that led you to make the decision, I want to enter the sex trade.
So yeah, it was, I want to say it was about like about 3 or 4 years of little things happening that just kind of pushed me in that direction. Mainly, it was toxic relationships with young, abusive men. And at the time, I, you know, would be angry, like, oh, that guy, you know, took money from me. Oh, that guy who's my boyfriend, you know, we bought this couch for my apartment at 19, you know, and he said he'd split it with me and then he didn't. And now I have to pay for this $2,000 couch on my credit card. And it was all these little things where, again, hyper focusing on that attention from men and that romantic sense being my entire world, like my relationships with men. It led me to just compromising myself with man after man that I was dating. And really, the men that I was dating were not in good headspaces. One was a child of a residential school survivor, and he had faced a lot of, I think, racism in our
Mm,
hometown for being Métis.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of issues that led to him being institutionalized numerous times in a youth detention facility, led to him developing quite a severe crack addiction, led to extreme emotional abuse, him stalking me at some points, harassing me, even at one point physically 2 times. He choked me almost to the point of unconsciousness. Just stuff like that. And then of course, after that, you think like, I'm not going to date another guy like that. And then because you haven't changed and you haven't healed personally, you fall back into that same type of relationship. Okay. So then, you know, the next guy I dated, same type of thing, just a young guy, and was working up in Fort MacMurray while I had a place here in Edmonton. Yeah. You know, we're both still only a year or 2 out of high school. He's up there working at the oil patch. He develops coke addiction. He did some bank fraud because eventually we got engaged, which again, I was 19 years old. I don't know why I did that. Don't get engaged at 19, anyone, but I did. And so then we had a joint bank account. He did bank fraud on my account, left me in debt, and I had, you know, no good paying job. I think I was making like 12 or 13 bucks an hour. It was so bad. So then broke up with that guy. And then after that, I kind of was starting to realize, okay, I'm at that point 21, in 2021, I have to get my life together. I have to stop paying so much attention to these young guys and focus on a career and where I'm going in my life. And so then, yeah, more problems there, but just, you know, no financial literacy, and just already having the start of debt at that point. And then that debt just accumulating more and more in its amount, because I just didn't know how to appropriately pay it off while still surviving. And so my answer was like, okay, just work harder, work more. And that's what we always hear with people in the sex trade. She should get a real job. She should just have work ethic. She should work harder. And it got to a point for 2 years, I worked 5 part-time jobs, averaging about 96 hours a week to try to clear this debt. Yeah, I know. I don't know how I did it. I look back.
Was some of the debt you took on because of the relationships you were in?
Yeah. And really it was kind of co-debt, because it was things that I agreed to that I shouldn't have agreed to, but I did. So it's not, you know, like it was completely faultless on my behalf, but it was just immaturity, lack of a backbone, you know.
Lack of boundaries, I think, right?
Yeah. And I think just a fear of being alone, because I didn't know who I was. So I, at that point, was still just identifying through my relationships. And
so are you at this point, you know, you've tried the relationship thing and being with a guy and, you know, being nice to a guy, helping a guy, accommodating the guy, you know, whatever it was you did to make these relationships work. And here you are, you're 21, and this is it disillusioning? Are you becoming cynical on relationships at this point? Are you like, where are you at in your head in terms of, you know, what is there any point, like what did you think of men at this point? Like, was there any point in keep trying?
Well, I think like I'm a hopeless romantic. So I think at the end of the day, I'm always like, oh, love, and, you know, pure love, true love. And I think, again, that's most people, and it's our demise sometimes because we compromise ourselves in the pursuit of the vision of what we want. And we don't really look at what is actually in front of us. So I do remember being, you know, at that age, I think I was 20, maybe 21. And my dad said to me, Andrea, what are you doing with these losers? Time to date a guy who's got his shit together, like date a guy in his 30s. Wow. And I remember saying to my dad, oh, like I would never date a guy 10 years older than me. Like, that's like, what? Like a guy in his 30s? Like, he's, you know, divorced with kids. But now I kind of look back at what my dad said, and I'm like, you know, okay, 20 and 30, yeah, it's a big age gap. But really, like a lot of young men, just like a lot of young women, don't really find themselves until they're in their 30s. And so the 20s, you change so much, and really so much of that changing is happening on the give and take of your interpersonal relationships. So I look back now and I'm kind of like, oh, he was probably right. I should have done that. But, you know, I wanted the guy with the flashy chains and the white shoes, and, you know,
well, I hear from women in their, like, say their mid-20s that are telling me all the guys my age are like super immature. And they're into, like, you know, partying and porn, and like they won't grow up. So they're looking for guys 30 and up, like that don't have kids yet, but
Uh,
you know, kind of in that next decade of life, because there's a big difference between 32 and 23, right?
yes,
So
absolutely.
I'm hearing that more from women. Okay, so you just came out of the last bad relationship, and you're in Edmonton, and what happens that you get into the industry?
So again, that would probably take me a really long time to break it all down because it was so many little things. But at the end of the day, the main thing that it was I ended up with $60,000 of debt on my credit cards. I had no food in my fridge. I had, I think, like a quarter tank of gas in my car. Every single bill I had was coming up on being due. I had, you know, like just everything coming at me, and no room anymore on my credit card for anything, because I was kind of, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul and doing the financial juggle. And yeah, it was just my breaking point. And so again, no food, no gas, and working about 96 hours a week and thinking, what now? What can I do? I
Yeah,
can't work anymore. I can't add any more hours. I
yeah,
didn't know anything about bankruptcy or like debt consolidation at that time.
right.
Um, and I'm at one of my 5 jobs, and I look in the back of the Edmonton Sun newspaper, and I saw an ad, a very vague ad that just said adult entertainment, make $2,000 a week. And I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know anything about the sex trade. Like I said, never watched porn or just knew anything about any of that. So I called this ad and just kind of was like, what's this all about? And I didn't know at the time that it was a brothel, but found out quite quickly. And that kind of started the whole 7-year spiraling journey into that world.
So okay, so you're basically were in a situation in your life where you couldn't work any harder at these minimum wage jobs, that you saw very few other options, were drowning in debt, and weren't sure how you were going to get out of it. And all of a sudden this ad says you can make 2,000 a week. I mean, that's 8 grand a month, and you're thinking, oh shit, I'll just do this for a year and then my problems are solved. Something like that probably is what you're thinking. You do a little math in your head and you're thinking, like, how bad can it be? And
Yeah.
we'll check it out. Okay, so tell me what, if you're okay with talking about this, and like let me know anytime if you'd rather not, but walk me through meeting the guy in the ad and the first day. Like what was that like? What did they tell you?
So I called the number, and maybe I can say it now because it's no longer in existence, but it was a place called Manhattan Men's Club.
Mm,
And it was a seriously mouse infested brothel. But at the
okay,
time, it was actually Edmonton's top brothel. So
okay,
in some ways, I look back and I'm actually kind of thankful in a very weird way that that was the ad that I responded to and not one of the other ones, because in time I came to realize that, you know, there's some pretty seedy, unclean places. And so this ad, I just called and said, "What's this all about? I need $2,000 like a day, you know, every day.
yeah,
So
yeah,
when can I start?" And I really actually had kind of thought it was maybe webcamming or stripping,
okay,
because again, it said men's club. So I kind of
mm,
thought, oh, like, you know, again, didn't know anything about it. So
mm,
I call, and it's a woman who answers, and I said, what do you do there? Like, what kind of adult entertainment is this? And she said, I can't tell you anything on the phone. You have to come and talk to me in person. And so she gave me an address, and then I went there. And again, this was before like a lot of people had internet. I think I had internet, but it was still, you know, not,
yeah, dial up, pretty slow, and
yeah, it
yeah,
wasn't anything major where like
okay,
you can get on a smartphone and check an
mm,
address or anything. So I didn't know what it was until I actually pulled up. And then I
okay,
saw these like stencils on the window of like women's silhouettes and things like that. And so I'm like, okay, I know it's something to do with women being sexualized, but I just didn't know. I walk into this brothel, and really the thing I remember most is the smell that hit me.
oh,
And it's a smell that is very characteristic of every brothel I have ever been in. And I've been in quite a few now to recognize it right away. It's a mix of humidity from the showers, a mix of perfume from the women, and also a smell kind of I can't really say, it's almost like a dusty, dingy carpet kind of smell. Again,
Oh,
really
like the
hard
old
to
musty
describe.
basement carpet kind of thing, or, okay.
Yeah,
Ew,
but really the humidity and the perfume is the
okay,
main one that kind of hits you a lot of the time. And so I walk in and this smell just hits me right away. And back then too, we could still smoke in businesses, so there was
right,
cigarette smoke too. And
okay,
yeah, so I walk in and the madam, the owner of the brothel, meets me right away, and very beautiful woman, young, well, probably about 30, 35
okay.
maybe. Yeah,
And you're,
really.
and you're 22, right?
Yeah, and I
Okay,
really did not look like, I think, what people would envision the typical sex seller to be. Like I was always kind of a tomboy, and again, really into athletic stuff, so I
okay,
didn't look the part. But every woman there had like these long hair extensions, the acrylic nails, the tan, the breast augmentation, really skimpy lingerie, the 7-inch clear heels. And I just felt so intimidated. I remember being like, oh my gosh, like this is a whole new world.
right,
And so the madam saw me and she said, I'm just dealing with someone, but you can have a walk around and I'll catch up with you in a minute. Just have a tour. So I walk through this place, and again, I don't even know what it is, but I see this bar area, and there's a woman there mixing some drinks, and the man is sitting at the bar. And then I'm walking through and I'm looking in these each individual rooms, and they all have beds and showers in them. And it's really dark. I could barely see anything in this place, but super dark. So then, within a couple of minutes, the owner comes up to me and she said, "Did you have a look around?" And I said, "Yeah." And I must have looked like a deer in headlights because I was
yeah.
just, what's
Well,
going
you
on?
had never seen anything like this before, right?
Yeah. So she
Okay,
says to me, like, she just kind of stops and looks at me and she goes, "You do know what we do here, right?" And I kind of leaned into her and whispered, and I said, "I think so. Like, yeah, like you guys do hand jobs, right?" And she kind of looked at me and just started laughing. And at
okay,
first I was like, did I offend this woman? Like, what did I
mhm,
say that's funny or wrong?
right.
And she turned to me and she goes, "No, we rarely do hand jobs. We fuck for money here." And that was exactly
Wow,
what she
just
said.
lay it right out there, right?
Yeah, just
Mhm.
cold served to
Yeah,
me.
right
And
in your, just right, there you go, right in your face.
yes,
Wow,
and that really, like, I literally must have kind of jumped or something, and I was like, "Oh,
yeah,
okay."
yeah,
And she just said it with such effortlessness, like it
right,
was just like, this is what we do. It was
yeah,
no stigma, no taboo, no nothing. It was just
mhm,
very given coldly.
mhm,
So I remember instantly, as soon as she said that, I thought to myself of my mom and dad. That was the first thing I thought of, and I thought, oh my gosh, like I'm not
interesting,
one, yeah, like I'm not one of those people. My mom would kill me. My dad would come here and drag me out of here.
yeah,
I'd get a 6-hour lecture.
yeah,
So the very first thing I just thought was, I'm not one of those girls. I'm not one of those people. And I always say this in every conversation I have, is that I had felt privy to the preconceived notion of who a sex seller is. And that's, again, somebody who has been abused as a child, somebody who is struggling in addiction,
mhm,
um, somebody who is subhuman, just not a good girl kind of thing.
mhm,
And so I didn't see myself in the same light as those women. And I just remember telling the woman, that's not me. I can't do it. Sorry. Thanks for the interview or the chat.
yeah.
And she said something to me as I left. She said, "Okay, talk to you soon, or see you in a week." Or it was something where she was basically
Wow,
saying, like, "You'll be
cocky.
back."
It's a little cocky, eh? See,
It was. Yeah. And I
but
remember
you'll be
walking out.
back, you'll be back, yeah.
I know. Yeah. And I remember
Mhm,
walking out there thinking, like, wow, like, as if,
that's
like,
it,
I
yeah,
will not be back. Like,
yeah,
how desperate do you think I am?
right.
It was, yeah.
She
But
must have, maybe she saw it in your eyes or something, like she obviously is pretty street savvy, this woman, and has been around it, and she maybe sensed something from you in the conversation you had.
yeah, I'm not sure. Either that or
Yeah,
she just saw enough women coming through there that were my age,
yeah,
that were broke, that were coming
yeah,
with, the $10 Walmart bag instead of the $400, Gucci
yeah.
bags, whatever it
Oh,
is.
she probably scanned you right, up and down and sized you up within, 30 seconds, right?
I think so. Like at that point, I don't even think I had gone and gotten like a haircut in probably about a year and a half, because I couldn't even afford to go spend like 20, $30 to get my
Wow,
ends trimmed.
wow,
So
right.
yeah, I was rolling in there broke and disheveled looking, and I think she just saw that and was like, "You'll be back." Like you won't want to live like that forever when you've now seen what these women have. Because again, I would look and there's like Coach bags and, you know, like these really nice jackets and just all these things. And whenever I entered in there, there was Cadillacs out back. There was BMWs. There was no crappy little car like what I was driving.
Right.
So it was kind of like this romanticized vision of like, this is what you could have. You just have to come sit on the couch and then go in the room with the guy.
Yeah.
So
Well, you see all of the surface, you know, the glitz on the surface, but of course have no idea of the, none of this is free. You pay a price for it and have no idea what the price is that maybe you're going to pay, right? So,
exactly.
walk me through the next week or whatever, like from leaving there, going, that's not me, to making up your mind that I'm going to give it a shot and going back. What happened?
It took almost no time at all. Instantly, I was down at the police station getting a police record check, which we still need in Edmonton to get a license.
Yeah.
And then I was instantly down at the city of Edmonton paying my $200, which honestly, I don't even know how I got that money. I tried to remember that over the last few years because I did not have $200. So I can't remember maybe if I lied to my mom and said I needed it for a bill or what it was, but somehow I scrounged up this $200 for the license that my city was charging me and also the $40 for this police record check. And I got licensed and I called the owner and I said, I have a license. And she said, oh, great. You know, make sure you get some condoms and some lubricant and here's your first shift. It's in, you know, a couple days and here's the schedule.
So just to be clear, this is legal in Edmonton in the 90s.
It's actually never been illegal to sell sex in Canada, but everything around it has been illegal. So again, communicating for the purposes of selling sex, owning a brothel, like all those things. So
how did they get away with it? Because this was an illegal establishment.
No, they never have been legal. It's always been illegal in Canada, and the city of Edmonton just skirts it purposely and doesn't care. They have bylaw 13138, which licenses escort agencies, independent escorts, brothels, strip clubs, peep shows, and then other things too, like liquor stores, pawn shops. Those are all under that bylaw, but it's a direct violation of federal law and always has been. And the city of Edmonton says we're doing harm reduction, and they have a great team of lawyers that has just very carefully worded the bylaw so that they are just teetering right on that line where they can't be sued by, you know, any federal body or anything like that for circumventing the law. So yeah, that's a whole nother rant. I could go off for hours.
Yeah, they're in direct violation of federal law, but it seems like there's a lack of will to enforce this. And they're actually a group of people that collude to maintain the status quo in this area. What was your license actually for? You said you got a license. Is that the picture on Twitter that you posted?
Yeah, so that was
for
one
what? A license for what?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's actually not the exact license I was given when I started selling sex. That was a license that I got. It's the same license, but it was given to me when they switched the bylaw to the wording, because when I first started, it was a holistic reflexology license, which allowed me to give a massage of a hand, feet, and face to somebody. That was all I was allowed to massage.
Well, that's how they get around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we were all holistic reflexologists, which was actually very good to put on like Canada Revenue Agency tax return instead of Escort or, you know, something more derogatory. But that was our actual term, holistic reflexologist. And then what ended up happening was there was a group of actual registered massage therapists here in Edmonton that said, we are tired of men coming to see us for therapeutic massage and demanding or expecting sexual release. So they said the problem is that these places have massage after their names, right? So then the city felt pressure to change it to what they now call as body rub establishments.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just changing one word for another, basically. It's the same thing.
Semantics. It's just semantics.
Yeah, absolutely semantics. And so now under the body rub one, you are allowed to give a soft tissue manipulation of an erotic nature. And so that's now, it's not hand, feet, and face only. Now it is erotic themed massage manipulation of soft tissue. So they just, again, have just kind of polished it up a little bit and that gives the hush hush to everybody. There, you know, there's your little scrap, and now you can stop complaining about
Well,
it.
I guess I'm thinking, you know, then you can't touch a man's erection because that's not soft tissue.
Yeah. You'd be surprised, actually, Paul. I can't tell you.
Sorry, but you know, when you said hard and soft, and this is what came to mind, and I'm like, you know what? There's a case you can fight it against based on that wording right there.
That's true, but you know,
Wow.
erectile difficulty was one of the things that we saw more than anything in the sex trade. So it's funny, people think that these sex buyers are all just these like sexual champions and
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
sexual satisfiers.
yeah.
Some of them are what we do call sport fuckers, which are the guys that will take Viagra or Cialis and they will come and just have sex with you aggressively and hard for 1 hour straight. But the vast majority I found were more so men in their 50s and 60s that were taking, you know, Viagra or Cialis and were struggling. They were using penis pumps, they were using cock rings, anything that they could to maintain an erection to try to have sex with the woman.
Well,
So
okay, so this is a good segue into my next talking point, which is, you know, we call the buyer of sex the John, is the lingo, the John. So for viewers that aren't familiar with that, the person that pays for the sex is referred to as the John. So what to talk about? Well, I want to hear about your first, like, say, few days on the job, like I want to hear about the psychological impact of that on you, because there's one thing to know in your head what you're getting into, and then there's to actually like live that for a week or a month, right? But I want you to talk about what's the typical John or sex buyer. Do they have a profile? Are they married? Are they single? Like you just talked about a few types of them. So can you explain that a little bit more? Expand on that.
sure. So really quickly to go back to my first experience, I was what I call sniffed out by the men who are out there looking to take advantage of the new, young, impressionable, and vulnerable woman. So I went into the room with this man, and I remember saying to the owner, like, what do I do? How do I go in there and say, hi, this is me? And now 5 minutes later, I'm giving this man a blowjob. She's like, you just do it. And I was just like, this seems so inauthentic, you know, like, where's the exchange, the back and forth, the, you know, the courting kind of aspect, like that,
Yeah,
you know, something that you would see in a typical relationship.
something relational.
Yeah,
Mhm,
humanizing, you know,
mhm.
but I guess, you know, obviously now I know that that's just not really part of most sex trade transactions. And so I walk into this room and it's a man, and I think he was probably late 40s, maybe early 50s, I can't say for sure. And he was very rough with me, very aggressive, very forceful. And of course, I'm going in there treating it like I would with any other sex that I'd had. So I was like trying to be present and trying to, you know, extract enjoyment for myself and trying to treat it like I would anything else. And he was just very like, do this, do that, you know, move this way, you know, suck my dick, like all. And it was just so like, I never really actually had a guy treat me that way, which
Right.
is shocking because I didn't date the best guys, but they are all.
So your very first experience on the brothel is worse than the best bad date that you or bad sex that you had before with anyone.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And I don't know if that's just the phony pleasantries, you know, that maybe like
Mhm.
the younger guys that I was dating, they just felt like they had to say and do those things to have sex with me. And
Yeah.
this guy just obviously knew, like, I gave you the money, I don't have to do any of that. Like,
Right.
I don't know what it was, but
So he has zero regard or empathy for your humanity. Is that
I
a
think
good way to
so.
saying
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I was just a
Okay.
product, right? I was
No
just
pretense. There's not even a pretense of, oh, hi, you know, hi, sweetie, what's your name? Or none of that.
nothing.
Okay.
Nothing. As soon as I walked in, he kind of just sized me up, and then it was right, like, do this, do that, take those off, do this. And again, he was a seasoned sex buyer, so to him, there was no need, right? It wasn't any type of like trying to cushion the blow, so to speak. He
Right.
was just like throwing me right into the fire.
Right.
And I remember he also shorted me $20 at the end. And I was so angry about that. And I just remember being like, you know, why did that guy do that? Like, this is my very first time. Like, why didn't he try to be a bit nicer to me? You know, and I remember giving him a blowjob with a condom and him trying to pressure me to do it without the condom.
Right.
And he said, every girl does that, every girl, and they do it for less, you know. And then he'd be like, lick my testicles and all these things. And I said to him, like, I don't want to do anything that is uncovered away from a condom, because I don't want to have anything to go home with except for the money,
Right.
and he just kept applying that pressure and pressure. And I'm so thankful that I withstood it. I didn't succumb to it, but I know so many young women do. And he definitely tried. But when he ripped me off that 20 bucks at the end, and it was just the insult to injury. I just remember feeling just hollow. That's the best way to describe it, is hollow. Like he had somehow
Oh,
infiltrated my body and just took me out of me. And then after that, I had 3 more men that were lined up that day. So in a 7-hour shift, I saw 4 men that day. And the other 3 were better, but they were all the same type. Who's the new girl? Who's the youngest girl? And they go around looking for those girls because they know that they can do the tricky little things like stealthing, right? Removing a condom during sex, where you wouldn't think, you're not a
oh,
seasoned veteran woman. So
right, right.
yeah, thankfully, again, the other 3 weren't as bad to me. But I remember, leaving there, and after doing my payouts and all this kind of stuff, I had $720 in my hand. And I,
720.
yeah,
Right.
after seeing 4 men.
For
So essentially,
what you would make in a week at your 5 jobs.
yes, yeah.
Mhm.
And so I went home, and I remember just sitting there looking at this money, and I just had this really weird sensation of like this dichotomy. Oh my God, this is amazing. This is a week's worth of my pay. Like you just said, I can now pay my phone bill. I can pay some groceries, and I can fill my gas and put gas in my car, like instantly, all right now, done.
Yeah.
And then the other part of me was like, I have done something that I never thought I would do. I have compromised myself beyond what I ever thought I would. And I want to just rip the skin off my body right now because I'm so disgusted in myself. And from how that felt
Wow.
to have these people, I don't even know their names. I
Mhm.
have no clue who they were. These 4 men just touched me and were inside my body. And I just remember crying and crying and crying.
So
And then the
you
next day,
cried. You cried the first night.
oh, I cried for hours that night, probably about 2 hours. And then the next day I was right back there. And
Would you say it traumatized you?
I don't know so much if it was trauma as it was just that initial jump, like it was,
So why the tears, Andrew?
I think just because I felt like I had compromised myself.
Betrayed yourself? Is
Yeah,
that a way of
yeah,
saying it?
yeah,
Mm.
I would say so. And it's really weird because it wasn't, yeah, it's always so hard to describe kind of that moment because, like I said, it was such a dichotomy. It was like this
Mhm.
bliss, this amazing, like, you deserve that money. You got that. You worked for it. Like, this is what you've been waiting for. You've been struggling for years. And now this is your ticket out. This will get you where you want to go. And then the other one was, look at what you had to do for this. That's not who you actually are. Like, wake up. This isn't right. But again, that pull towards that sex work
Yeah,
ideology that had conditioned me and groomed me made
yeah.
me lean more in the direction of, this is a good thing, because survival is precedent. That's the paramount thing of all of us is, Maslow hierarchy of needs. You can't think
Right.
about what you're doing socially and how that makes you feel when you're starving and you're hungry. So yeah, it has the
Well,
ability to do
and
that.
it's yeah, well, and I'm thinking the term cognitive dissonance, that first night when you came home, which is basically a conflict between, your values that you feel, your self-integrity, and it comes into conflict with your actions and behaviors, and you're not sure what to do about that because I mean when you tell me that story, I see someone who's combination of desperate, naive, um, maybe were you gullible, or I don't, no, I don't say that as a criticism, I
I
just
say
mean like were you
disillusioned.
maybe disillusioned, desperate and naive. Well, everyone's naive at 22, so that's by no means a criticism at all. But right, and here you are, and if you had 20 bucks after that, you probably would have never went back. Do you think? I don't
Never.
know, right?
Mhm.
But 720, you can't argue with the fact that this pays better than anything you've ever done.
Yeah. And back then I
Yeah,
didn't, again, have that ability to say, why am I being paid $720 for 4 hours of work
yeah,
that really requires no post-secondary education, required no training
right.
whatsoever, can be done by anybody.
Mhm.
But, when we see people that make big incomes, so again, doctors, lawyers, politicians, all those people that are making that same 300, 200, 300 an hour type wage, we value those people because those people have done the groundwork to earn
Right.
that wage. So then whenever you're all of a sudden getting that money, you feel almost as if you've been elevated to that professional level or to
Do
some.
you, or do you not feel like an imposter, or do you feel elevated?
I felt almost like finally men saw my value.
Oh,
And
wow.
that
So
was
this
the
is
weird thing.
right, right. So is this tying into the female, sorry, the teenage, the teenage, beliefs of, finding my value and being, if men, if I'm not saying it well, if men find me valuable, I have value. That
Mhm.
was kind of a core idea that you came out of your teenage years with, and
Yeah.
now it's validated by the big wad of cash sitting on your table.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
It was. And that was, now I can look back and I recognize that I was just desperate for male approval and male attention and obviously money as well. And so when those two combined, it was almost like this soothing comfort of like, I have everything I wanted and everything I've been trying for. And now
Mm.
I'm in the driver's seat. I control that. And it's not anymore the men that are holding those strings and dancing me around like their little puppet. Now I'm in that power pole position, like now they're
Right.
coming to me. I'm valued. It wasn't me seeking anything from them at that point. And because again, I was new and young, the phone never stopped ringing for me at that brothel. And especially being athletic and caring about my body, like I was in great shape at 22 and I wasn't cynical at that point yet. So,
Right.
I was happy and I was very much a giver to men. I felt good about making men feel good. And at that time, I thought what I was doing was helping men too. I thought, oh, here's this lonely, sad guy. And yeah, he's
Mm.
overweight, but oh, he's so nice and he deserves sex. He deserves it
Right.
anytime he wants it, because he's a
Yeah.
good guy. And just
Okay.
so
So
many things.
who are the sex buyers? Talk. What do they
Yeah.
do? Who are they? Who are the sex buyers?
Sorry, I totally went off on my side step
Yeah,
there,
that's
but
okay. We promised we would both correct each other's ADD during the conversation. So
yeah,
focus,
people with
focus,
ADD.
focus. Yeah.
Who put us together, right? This is not a
Oh, yeah. So who are these guys?
and that's funny because that's always the question, right? Is that people want to know who is it that could buy sex, because either they are somebody who is so removed from thinking that they could be that person that they're like, who are these people that would ever do that? Because I would never. Or people want to know because they want to study these people to understand how we can combat sexual exploitation. And of course, we know demand, and tackling demand is the answer to that. So in order to tackle demand, you have to know who the demand is. So that's probably the question I get asked more than anything is, who are these guys? And it's really hard to pinpoint them because they are the everyday man. They really are. A lot of people want to say, oh, it's the ugly guy, it's the overweight guy, it's the lonely guy, it's the sad guy, it's the guy who works too much, the guy who's in the loveless marriage, just there for his kids. And there's definitely those men that are there. But I found more than anything else, it was the man in denial, the disillusioned man. So again, either the man who was in denial about the harm that he was causing, either willfully or not, or it was the man who was like me, just conditioned to think this is a job like any other. No harm, no foul. Like I paid money, I respected her boundaries, I didn't force myself on her, so I didn't do her any harm. And that was really the underlying tone to every single man that came to pay me for sex, was that disillusion that they carried, all of them. But when we talk about race or age or things like that, it really is every man. I have seen where men have brought their 16-year-old sons to brothels to try to have them lose their virginity to one of us. One guy, I think he thought
I've
maybe
heard of
his
that.
son was gay, and so he wanted to straighten him out by bringing him to the brothel. I have had sex with a 93-year-old man when I was 23. So the youngest I ever had sex with was 18, obviously, and then the oldest was 93.
Mhm.
I have had sex with Black men, with Indigenous men, with Asian men, Caucasian men,
Mhm.
men from India, um, European nations, you name it. If you can just point anyone on the street, it was really, that was who they were. But when you sell sex, you do in time tend to develop a regular clientele, or you do in time, if you're lucky, end up to be able to have a little bit of discernment about who you entertain. So in time, I came to realize that the young men in their 20s were just not the people that I want to have sex with. And again, that goes
I
back
was
to,
that.
yeah, it's basically what we talked about, you and I already, just, that hyperfixation on porn and the, kind of all over the map scattered and, just buying into that young, like, hegemonic masculinity kind of energy.
So,
And a
so
lot of,
what are they bringing? Like, do they have your, their porn fantasies, and you're going to be their porn doll? And
yes,
are they tend to be more, showing macho, controlling, hyper masculine sort of characteristics, more
all of
aggressive?
those things. Yeah, all of
Mhm.
those things. Basically, like if you look at, the animal kingdom and the young aggressive male species, like that
Okay.
was these guys too, right? They would come in
Okay.
packs. They
Oh,
would
okay.
say like, you go with her, I'll go with her, and they take
Like
us into
friends, like buddies would come together.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like they would come sometimes in groups of 3 or 4, and they just each take one of us into a room, and then they, meet up after and share their stories. And a lot of them too, I think because of porn and being desensitized physically because of porn, a lot of them too, they could maintain an erection, but they would have sex with you aggressively for 1 hour straight. And if they did ejaculate in that hour, they were ready to go again, and they expected to go again. So a lot of women I know in time stop seeing men in their 20s because,
What
especially if you're having sex with 8, 10, 12 men a day, you can't sustain an hour of aggressive, high energy sex with every single one of them. It's just not.
No, like what's the toll on your body as like an hour of sex? Because in the real world, this isn't something people do.
Mhm.
Or if they do, it's sort of paced out in a way that's comfortable for everybody. And it's not an hour straight where one person's calling the shots and it's aggressive like that. So what are the limits to you as a woman and on your
Yeah.
body?
Well, and I think the thing to remember too is whenever you're having sex outside of the sex trade, there's usually mutuality of desire. So
Right.
there is like things for women like natural lubrication of the vagina.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I sold sex, there was never a man that actually physically turned me on. So,
Right.
you're having intercourse where you're using lubricant and you're using condoms every single time.
Right.
And you're doing that repetitively over and over and over with a shower in between, which is also stripping you of natural lubricant
Right.
and things like that. And then they're grabbing silicone rubber toys, inserting those in you, cutting you with their fingers as they're trying to digitally,
Okay.
manually stimulate you.
Yeah.
It's really
It sounds
hard.
abusive on your body.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times like I left there completely swollen or like with my vagina torn where I couldn't even go back for days at a time because men were just so aggressive with me. And there wasn't many times that they ever checked in to, say like, is that good?
You okay? Does
Can
this
I,
hurt? Yeah.
yeah, would you like this? Like, what would you like to do? Like,
Yeah.
there were some that we called the pleasers that would
Right.
try to please you and they try to, make your enjoyment kind of
Yeah.
centered. But again, when it's somebody who's 70 and you're 20, 25, whatever, there's not typically for most women that natural attraction. So again, everything is simulated. So again, that
Yeah.
vaginal lubrication that is simulated
Right.
with lubricant. And if you were to not use the lubricant, then they're getting upset that you're not
Mhm.
naturally lubricated. And
Right.
so there's all the tricking of the client as well too, where you had to do things to make it seem like it was authentic just to keep them going so that you could hopefully get them to ejaculate as soon as possible and get out that door because
Right.
you have 6 more people to see or however many.
Right.
So big physical toll, huge physical toll. A lot of them pinning you down. That was a big thing. I can't tell you how many men pinned me down at the arms. Like I said, aggressively,
Yeah.
fingered me, cutting me on the inside of my body,
Right.
spitting on me, pulling my hair to the point where I was choking at times because they're just pulling my head back so hard. Men who would just reach out and slap me out of nowhere, no consent, no
Yeah.
discussion, that kind of stuff.
Well, this comes from porn, what you're describing
Absolutely.
too, that they're imitating what they've seen. So
Yeah.
as you describe this sounds to me, horribly abusive, and there seems nothing authentic, relational, pleasurable about it. And I'm wondering, as time went on, did you, by necessity, have to dissociate from your body and get really good at compartmentalizing these experiences so that you could function during the day?
Yes. So when I first started at the first brothel there, again, I guess I just hadn't figured out that dissociation was the key to survival. So
Mm,
every encounter I had, I was going in there as Andrea, not as Kendra, which was my alias. I was
okay,
Andrea, even though I said my name's Kendra, I was still me in that room. And I was still trying to do everything I did always to do a good job at anything I did, right? Like I like to think I'm kind of type A overachiever. So everything I did, I wanted to do it the best. And I
right,
wanted to make that guy feel like I was the best and that the time he had with me was the best.
right.
And so I did that for probably, I want to say about 2 months. I could be a little bit off. And then I had just a major, major mental breakdown to the point that I called
Wow.
the owner of the brothel and I was in tears. I think it was like middle of the night. And I said, I can't do this anymore. Like I'm leaving there depressed. The money doesn't matter. I don't care. I'll starve. I don't care. And
Yeah.
she said, take a week off. You just need a break. She said, nobody usually hits that breaking point until usually about 6 months in. Yours came a lot earlier.
How far in were you?
Only about 2 months, I want to say,
So
roughly.
2 months into this, and you've reached your limit. You've had enough.
Yeah, total
And the
meltdown.
owner knows full well that this happens to all the girls that come there, but it usually takes them about 6 months.
Yeah. And so there was nothing like, are you okay? Like, what do you need? Can I help you? Instantly, the first thing she said to me was, oh, that was really fast. Usually women
Yeah,
don't hit that point till 6 months. She said,
yeah,
you just need to take a week off or so, like take a little short
yeah.
break and then come back. And I said to her, I'm not coming back. I'm done. That's it.
Well, you're a
And
commodity to her as well, right? She
exactly.
doesn't care about you.
No, and I was the new young girl. So every
Oh,
shift I was there, I was seeing 4 or 5 men in that 7 hours minimum. And they were turning away bookings for me too. So,
How many
she
days
didn't want to lose me.
yeah, how many days a week did you work?
I was there on average about 4 to 6 because I was just so broke. And again, being so like hell bent on, I'm going to clear this debt. I
Right,
want to get an education, go to school. Like I knew all these things were going to cost money. And it's really funny because I remember the first time that I sold sex, I said to them, what do we charge? Like, what do I charge this guy for sex?
yeah,
And they told me it's $220 an hour. And then you pay $40 for a room fee. And I remember when they told me that thinking $220 an hour minus $40. So I'm only going to get $180 to have sex with this guy, like this stranger. That's all I'm
yeah,
getting.
yeah,
Because I was anticipating I'd get like $500 or like 1,000
yeah.
or something because of the nature.
Okay,
And but then when you look at what standard wages are, $180 an hour is it's substantial.
hmm,
But I remember in that brief moment thinking this isn't worth it. So I think that kind of built up into the point that I thought it's not worth it. I'm losing myself. I'm investing myself. I need to quit. So whenever I called her and said that, she told me, take a week off or whatever. I did take a week off. And then after that, bills keep coming. And I just thought to myself, you know what? Like, no, you can do it. You just have to do it the right way. And I didn't know what that was, but I think something in me just changed in that moment. And instantly then I was never Andrea. I was Kendra every single time. I was completely removed. I was dissociated 100% when they touched me. I didn't feel it. It was everything was logical. There was no emotion, no empathy, no sensation of anything. It was all going through the motions,
right,
saying something, doing the act, and leaving it in the room as soon as I was done and just focusing on that money. That was all I cared about, was that hyper fixation on
yeah,
money.
yeah. Did you get the debt paid off?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So
Because
after
again,
the debt, so after the 60,000 was paid, did you be like, okay, we're good now?
so it was kind of tricky because, and this I never talk about either, but I actually got married very soon after I started selling sex.
Okay,
Yeah, and that was a poor decision too. My ex-husband, just again another young guy in his early 20s who really just didn't know anything about the world, and I still didn't. And
did he know
so
what you did?
I lied to him for the first year and a half of our relationship because I just couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. And I
Mhm.
also didn't want him to judge me. And I didn't know if the relationship was going to go anywhere really in the
Right,
beginning. So I kind of thought, well, why do I have to tell him? Right? Like,
right,
why does he need to know that?
It's a
And I
lot of
carried
work though, to maintain a lie like that. It takes a
very
lot of
much.
work, right?
Yeah, and that feeds into that double personality. And just I remember sitting in the room, like the staff room with all the other women, and every woman there had a boyfriend. Not a single one of them knew what she did.
Oh,
They all
really?
so
Okay.
yeah, so it kind of made me feel, I don't want to say better about it, but I didn't really feel like I owed him the truth. Looking back now, I realize I did owe that to him because I was having sex with other people. And even though it was safe, protected sex, nothing is ever safe and protected
It's not
100%.
completely safe, right?
Exactly. So I was putting him at risk too. And so, anyways, got married. And so then with that comes the whole, let's get a house, let's get a better vehicle, let's do this, let's do that. And so even though I paid off the 60,000, I started to almost build my lifestyle around the money that I was making. And
Right.
so, I had this little condo, this little 2-bedroom condo, but I wanted a yard. I wanted a dog. I wanted that like picket fence life,
Okay.
with my soon to be husband there. And so then I got rid of my condo, but now I just bought a $350,000 house.
So you
And
needed
then
to keep making the money.
yeah, and that house needed furnishing and it needed landscaping and it needed all these things. And then I had this little crappy car. Now I needed a new vehicle, and I
Yeah,
think a lot
yeah,
of that is that
yeah,
affirmation. What I'm doing
yeah.
is working for me.
So when you're doing that, are you, what I mean, when you're selling sex, are you able at some point to say, like you said, you started sort of turning away the young guys in their 20s. What do you do when someone comes in who's 400 pounds and smells terrible, or is 80 years old? And I mean, there must be a visceral, like, attraction isn't a choice. We're generally attracted to people close to our age of a certain body type. So how do you overcome that visceral, like you must have been repelled or repulsed by some of these men? Am I right? And then how did you deal with that?
It's really weird because once you get beyond the point of, kind of analyzing selling sex as the same as normal sex, you
Uh,
don't really tend to have that same reaction. So whenever I would see the man who was 80 or 90 and I'd meet him in the waiting room, first thing I would think is this guy's going to come real fast. Get him in the
okay.
room, you know.
So it's
First
very transactional in your mind as well, right?
everything. Absolutely.
You
So
look at that as an easy paycheck then, in a sense. I
exactly.
know what to do to get him to come in like 15 minutes, and then, that it's over.
Yeah, like if there was the
Okay.
young guy, like I'd look at him and be like, oh, this guy, he might be challenging or have high expectations or be like porn sick. But
Yeah,
whenever it was the older man, they were my meal ticket. They were
right.
the mark. I wanted those clients per se because I
Mhm,
just knew that it was less work for me essentially.
mhm.
That said, once you're in the room, things can change because you don't always get what you see at face value. So, for example, that 93-year-old man, whenever I saw him, I thought, this guy, he probably can't even get an erection. He probably just wants to lay there and talk to me or,
Yeah,
cuddle or something like that.
right.
But 23 years old, I take this 93-year-old man into the room. He puts on the penis pump, gets an erection, puts on the cock ring. I don't know if he was taking Viagra or Cialis, but this man had sex with me like a 20-year-old, aggressively, rough. I'm honestly surprised he didn't die on the bed, honestly, because this guy, like, he
Surprised
was
his heart didn't give out, eh?
he
Wow.
was up there, like, and not very
Wow.
mobile, but
Yeah.
I think just a long time of buying sex, maybe. I don't know. But either way, in the moment, it was like, oh, this isn't what I thought. I thought it would be done instantly. And now after 50, 55 minutes of him still going and me having to say, hey, we have to stop, your hour is up, time to shower,
Right.
it has that same impact, and it was bad. I remember with him specifically, that was by far my most traumatic experience with a sex buyer. I went
Really?
home.
That 93-year-old.
Oh, I can still see his face. It was so bad, Paul. I went home and I couldn't stop smelling him. And I took shower after shower. I think I probably showered about 5 or 6 times in about 24 hours, to the point that I was like scrubbing my skin. I was red and raw when I got out of the shower because every time I got out of the shower, I kept smelling this guy. And I remember saying to myself, like,
Wow.
where is his smell? Like, is it in my hair? Did I miss
Mhm,
shampooing a spot? I didn't know what I was doing wrong because I didn't understand trauma. And I
mhm.
think that was truly the first moment where I realized, oh my God, this is what they talk about when they talk about trauma, because it wasn't a smell on my body. It was a smell that was in my mind. I couldn't forget how he smelled when he was right here in my face, heaving away on me with polydent and like, you know, right there. And it stuck, you know? So that was really the most traumatic. And then, like you said, the 400-pound man, I did have a man one time who was 550 pounds. I want to say 500, 550. And sometimes we didn't get to choose the men. We would just come out of one room and they'd say, someone's in the room waiting for you, your next booking.
I was going to ask you about that. Did you ever have any say in who you saw? Or could you look in and go, no, I'm not going to meet with him. Could you do that?
Yeah, you could. That all depended on your money situation though, because really, if we really chose those that we were attracted to or those that we would want to have sex with, it was zero. It was none of them. So every single one of them, it was more a sliding scale, like almost a continuum of the repulsion that they would give you. Some were more repulsive, some were less. But that 500+ pound man, that was another very traumatic experience for me. And I was a personal trainer before I started selling sex. So I have no issues with people who are morbidly obese. Like I've dealt with it a lot. But to be naked with somebody and to have them touching you, this man was so large that he had to lay on his back on the bed. And he actually had an inverted penis because the body fat around his penis had basically swallowed him up. So I remember thinking to myself, okay, he just wants to, you know, have a massage or like do something to me. And so I said, so what are you into? Like, what are you looking for? And he said, I want full service, which means penis and vagina intercourse. And I remember thinking to myself, like,
how am I going to find it?
Yeah. And so I said, oh, okay. And really in that moment, I should have had a backbone to say, you know what, it's not an option. What else can we do? But again, trying to be that people pleaser and be the best I could be, I tried to push down around his penile shaft and put the condom on. It like unrolled one roll on the ring. So it wasn't even, you know, covering a lot.
Yeah.
And I remember holding it there and pushing down this body fat and straddling him. And my legs, I couldn't even get my legs on the side of him. So I was putting my feet on his body, on his stomach, and standing on this man, basically. And as I'm riding him on top, he says, I'm going to come. And he ejaculates. And I don't know if my hand wasn't holding it the right way or something, but I lost grip of this condom. And as he ejaculated, the condom went flying off and he just covered me, inner thighs and vagina, in his semen. And I don't know if any of it got inside of me or what. I think most of it was outside.
What you want to happen though, right?
So traumatic. And again, it happens in the sex trade, right? Like condoms break and, you know, a lot of men want to come on your breasts or come on your stomach or whatever. But it was just something about that moment was just extremely traumatic for me. And you can't show it, right? You can't do that in that moment because
I have your game face on, I guess, right?
Exactly. And I didn't want to make him feel bad too, because I already felt bad for him that he was paying for sex and that clearly he wasn't getting sex in his personal life. So you have that. And there's honestly, I have hundreds and hundreds of stories, but those are really the two more than anything that have stuck with me about just that physical repulsion. Like people said things, you know, like both those men were polite to me and were kind. But on a physical level, that was the hardest, where dissociation didn't save me in those moments.
Yeah, and if there's any young girls watching this that somehow maintained a notion, it's not young girls, sorry, but maybe preteens or teens or young women watching this that entertained the notion that this is some type of glamorous get-rich-quick lifestyle, I hope your bubble is completely popped now. And Andrea, I want you to take, if you can take me through the next, say, 5 years, because we only got all of this is 2 months into it. Then you had a breakdown, and then walk me through, like, you came back, because you were in 7 years. So let's go through the dominatrix, travel companion, and escorting, and how that evolved from there. Because it sounds like after working in this brothel, you're like, yeah, I'm done with this, and I'm going to go out on my own and have a little more control over my destiny. Is that maybe what happened?
Yeah. So for me, I operated at 3 different brothels before I decided to venture out and build my own.
So you went to
And
this one, then the next one, then the next one?
yeah, and it was
Okay,
the
and were
same
they all basically the same?
pretty much, yeah.
Okay,
And they were all ran by women. We do have some brothels
interesting.
here. Yeah, we do have some brothels here that are ran by men. Very far and few. It's only a couple. It's typically women who either are current sex sellers or have sold sex that are running the brothels. And I always tell people it's kind of like climbing the corporate ladder. When you're doing something, you always think of how can I improve? How can I get better? Where do I go from here? Because nobody really wants to stay stagnant in anything that they do.
Sure.
And so that kind of led to me diversifying, I guess, if you will, what services I was offering. So I really was getting tired of just being groped and touched and penetrated by men. And I said, I've seen Pretty Woman. I've seen these women that get to travel and they kind of almost have that like sugar daddy, sugar baby kind of arrangement. And I thought, I need that, where I only just have like 1 or 2 men that I see and that they can cover my bills. And yeah, again, a lot of distorted thinking, but that was kind of the precursor to starting to do just other stuff rather than just being in the brothel in that same room over and over and over with just the men changing. But it actually started because a submissive man saw me just for regular sex. And he said to me, at the time I had jet black hair and I'm very pale skinned and you can't see it, but I'm very heavily tattooed as well. So he said to me, you have the look of a dominatrix and you would make more money. And you just, basically do all the stuff you want to do to the man. And they don't really often want to have sex with you. So this was like a godsend. When this guy told me this, I was like,
Wow.
oh,
Yeah,
like,
what are you thinking? Like, I get to be in control for once?
yeah, and everyone
Wow.
always told me I was in control, but I never felt that, right? Like there was always, like I said, where people said you can turn that guy away or he has to respect your boundaries. But the more
But they
boundaries you
don't.
put up, yeah, you
Yeah,
put
they
up more
don't.
boundaries and you don't make money, right? You're then called frigid or told that you're, hard to deal with or whatever, and then people don't want to see you. So this was an opportunity going into domination to feel like, I could be me and not have to be submissive because I'm very much a dominant woman too, and a type A personality. So to be this like coy, like kind of submissive woman was
Right.
not authentic with me at all.
Okay.
So now I could tie men up. I could slap them. I could urinate on them. I could wear a strap on and peg them, which is anal insertion.
Penetration. Yeah.
Yeah, like all these types of things. And some men would want to have ejaculation at the end, but typically it wasn't even intercourse. It was typically just a hand job. So it in the beginning seemed a lot better. And I kind of thought to myself, like, this is actually where I was supposed to be all along. And this is what I meant to do. And I like to think I was really good at it because I had the ability to kind of mind fuck the guy, if you will. So, you deprive them of senses, you deafen them, you blindfold them, you gag them, you tie them up. And all that is left is the feeling sensation, right? That sensory one. So then you're running like Wartenberg wheels, or you're dripping hot wax on them. You're electrocuting them with violet wands. You're piercing their nipples or their scrotum. You're doing all these things. And really, you don't feel violated in that moment. But again, there's always those moments where it makes you realize it's not real. So then when the men would ask me to, bake muffins out of my fecal matter for them to eat, or have them lay on the floor in the shower for me to defecate in their mouth, or to, urinate in shot glasses for them to take shots, or, 4-liter jugs for them to drink of my urine, or role play kids, animal play, bestiality, just all that kind of stuff that comes with domination.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really where it then said to me, this is no different. It's still just disgusting, revolting stuff.
Yeah. It seems to be like, I work with a lot of porn and sex addicts. And so, we talk about escalation and tolerance. And what happens is when you're activating this particular reward system of the brain, it creates of course, a dopamine rush and a sense of arousal, but over time, a person becomes desensitized. Like I'm listening to you talk about these escalating behaviors, and with porn addicts, and I can't speak so much to the BDSM, but with porn addicts, they start watching porn that introduces other emotions like disgust, is a big one. Shock, surprise, the taboo, you know. And so people listening to you describe some of those acts are shocked and revolted probably. And from a neural pathway point of view, that's the whole point. Because they're looking, because like people listening to this, and you can tell me what you think, but the guy is actually not looking for, you know, to eat muffins made of fecal matter. He's looking for something that will give him a sense of a rush or a euphoria. And he's probably been engaging in these types of behaviors for so long that it's escalated to that point. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yes, 100% agree. And
Yeah.
so many of my domination submissive clients, they were people that were normal sex buyers prior to that. They had never even gotten into anything.
Were
And
they
like,
all sex buyers, Andrea?
yeah, I would say for me, it was like there's different distinctions of domination. So you have what's called a pro dom, and that's someone who will never, ever, ever have sex with the submissive, never.
Yeah.
And then you have a dominatrix or a dom who will allow the sub to have a sexual release in some regard. So, you know, sometimes people will kind of mix that up and they'll say, well, I'm a pro dom. I'm not actually a sex worker because I just, you know, cause pain on people. There's nothing really sexual about it.
Right.
But it's like what you said, it's that sliding scale. So a lot of the times, you know, these submissive men that would see me started off as just everyday normal guys that just only enjoyed oral sex and penis and vagina intercourse. And now they're into really, really graphic stuff and sickening stuff too. And it always had something to do with some like repulsion factor, like you
Yeah,
said.
disgusting. Yeah, I guarantee you they all watched porn of those things as well before they probably
so.
came and saw you, right? Yeah, I would
Yeah.
bet money on it. So go ahead.
And I was just gonna say, and the weird thing about that too was like when I sold sex, it was a body dissociation. When I did domination, it was a mental dissociation. So there was times literally vomit was coming up in my throat. And one time I remember I actually did vomit in my mouth and had to swallow my own vomit because I was so repulsed as to what I was doing to this man. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's really weird. Like, because they're not touching you, you don't really have to physically dissociate, but you have to mentally still be in character mode and not be Andrea, because Andrea does not want to be behind this man who she's pegging with, you know, a strap on, and it's coated in fecal matter, and it's
smells bad, looks bad, everything about it.
Everything. Yeah.
Is there a psychological reversal of sorts that you enjoy though, from going from being pawed and penetrated and poked and abused and held down and slapped and choked to now being going from the recipient to the deliverer of? Did this, looking back on it, did this bring some kind of sense of justice to you, maybe that you're the deliverer of the pain instead of the recipient?
I don't know, maybe so much of justice would be the word, but more comfort. I think comfort would be the level, like, like detachment, because at the time, all I could remember was physically, I'm not there. So I think now that I could physically feel like, okay, nobody's touching me, I'm okay. It felt okay to do that to somebody else. And it took me a really long time before I started again, you know, getting into like abolition and really understanding everything, before I could kind of say to myself, are you faultless or harmless in doing that to someone else just because it's not being done to you? Now I look back at some of the things I did to submissive men, and even though they asked for it, I don't think that they benefited from me doing it to them. I don't think that it actually did anything good, rather than just maybe replicated some trauma that they had, or some kind of, you know, sadness that they just wanted to be punished or something like it.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I've always looked like intuitively, I always suspected that people that engage in BDSM are trying to reconstruct some kind of trauma that they have, right? And like I have one example of a client who was into this so she was a submissive, so she would want to be spanked in a humiliating way. But of course, you have like a word, like a safe word, you can say, you know, stop or whatever, and they have to stop. So it gives you a sense of control. And, you know, and then talking about her childhood, she was like very shamefully spanked by a harsh, authoritarian, rigid father, like like where if she did something wrong, she'd be called downstairs and her brothers would be lined up and her dad would make her pull her pants down and spank her in front of everybody, right? So obviously you see how whether you believe in corporal punishment or not isn't my point. The point is it's done in such a humiliating and degrading way. And then she tells me about finding these clubs where she would go that, and it just seems so obvious to me that people are recreating her trauma. And therapists know about trauma reconstruction. It's what we call it. And it's the adult creates the situation that was traumatic, but hoping for a different outcome. And they're now in control, or at least they create the illusion of control. So yeah, I'm going to be spanked and humiliated, but you're going to start when I tell you, stop when I tell you, and I'm going to be in control. Like, what do you think of that? Because there's a school of thought among therapists, and it's sort of like these sex, like sex positive, they're called sex therapists. And oh yeah, kink is great and BDSM is great. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, that just seems like such bullshit to me. What's your thought?
I've heard both arguments. I've heard, that argument, particularly where people say reconstruction of trauma. And I agree for the vast majority of people. And I think then that there is some people, a small sublet, where it's just pleasure from pain. And I don't think it has anything to do with trauma. I'm not certain, but I've been told that the part of the brain that receives pain is basically almost running parallel to that which receives pleasure. Okay. So they say sometimes with those people, there might not be like a membrane between the two. Oh. So even myself, truthfully, I tend to get pleasure from pain. Like as a runner, I love when I get that burn, and I'm going and I'm at my 20 kilometer mark. And
no one believes us. Try running a half marathon and you'll understand. But this isn't sexual though. This is a different kind of pleasure. This is from adrenaline, well, and dopamine too, right? And serotonin, a lot of the same neurochemicals. But I tend to I hate to make blanket statements and say everybody that does BDSM is reconstructing trauma, but I like what you say. Like, I think for a small minority of people that there needs to be more questions asked to figure out what's going on. Yeah. But I think did the guys that you were doing this to seem like they were, and like you mentioned, like the shame that you like you pick up on things, what dissociated or not, like you sense, though, you feel things in the room, you sense what shame, pitifulness, like what is it, hate, self-loathing, like what do you pick up from these guys?
Definitely, I would say every submissive that I saw, every single one of them had low self-esteem or feelings of personal inadequacy in some regard. And it reminds me of one man in particular, this one 100% rooted in trauma, but it really ties into what you were mentioning. He was a man from Turkey, and he grew up with a very, very, very strict Catholic mother. And so he said there was no talk of sex. There was no talk of any education. Like I would ask questions. I was 12. My mom would not give me anything. She'd say like, that's dirty. We don't talk about this. So he said when he was 12, he found, I think it was his friend's dad's Playboy or some type of hustler or something. And so he stole it, went to his home. His mom said goodnight to him. He went to bed. And then what he did, he said, is he had a flashlight. He had it in his mouth. He opened up this porn magazine. He was kneeling on the ground, masturbating to it, and had a blanket over himself to try to like hide any light or whatever. And he said, right when he was at the point of ejaculation, his mother walked in, ripped off the blanket, and started just slapping him as hard as she could across his face, just, holding him by the back of the head, just slapping him incessantly. And at that point, he ejaculated. And he said that was basically his first sexual experience, like ever. Had never masturbated, nothing. That was it.
Right.
When he would come to see me for domination, what do you think he wanted to do?
He wanted you to slap him in the face while he masturbated.
Yes, he would kneel.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like that just, it makes so much sense. There's almost a logic to it, isn't there?
Yeah, and I would feel bad because when this man left, there would literally be welts, like fingerprint welts, just swelling out of his face. And again, I have a black belt in karate, so like I'm not hitting this guy light. Like
you know how to throw swing a punch,
and so this would be an hour straight of me just slapping him and my hand would ache.
My hand would hurt.
Yeah. So like in that case right there, I didn't again understand trauma because I was only mid-20s and I wasn't educated on it. And so I just kind of thought, oh, this guy's just weird. And now I look back and I'm like, that was a severely abused and traumatized child. And
Right.
all I did was just basically step into the role of his mother and replicate
Right.
that. And did that help him? I don't think it did. I think that people tend
No.
to gravitate towards what their first sexual experience is, and that tends to shape a lot of it. And so
No.
when you look even at like survivors of childhood sexual abuse, many of them don't go on to have healthy sexual relationships because that has been ingrained in that formidable time of,
Mhm.
their sexuality developing. And so I really think, we have to be careful when talking about BDSM that we're not replicating harm against people. But that's a bigger argument of like, well, some people it's okay, some people it's not. Who wins in that argument? It kind of goes back to the sex work debate as well. Some people identify as a sex worker, but many don't. So who do we prioritize? Whose rights trump the others, essentially?
Yeah, well, and I think there may be a difference between, let's say, a couple that have a committed, loving relationship that's consensual and they want to play around with handcuffs and whips and that sort of thing is different to me than categorically than a guy that goes to your, dungeon and pays you to slap him for an hour and gives you money. That's two completely different things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, that's so many more questions, Andrea, and we're running out of time here. I know we got about 10 minutes left. You kind of answered my question about the psychological dynamics of transactional sex and the headspace that you need to be in as the person providing the sexual what services. I don't like the word services, but that's all that comes to mind right now. And we talked about being emotionally present versus dissociating, and basically, about 2 months into this, you realize I have to find a way to not to be there, but not be there.
Mhm.
I'll change my name. I'm a different person. I adopt a different persona. I shut down my emotions. And we know from Brene Brown talks about this. If you've ever heard of her, she has some good stuff on shame. But she made the point: you don't selectively numb emotion. You either numb emotion, all of it, or you don't. So I'm thinking over time you must have become a very emotionally numb person, right? To cope. Like this is your survival mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that that's a lingering effect of the sex trade. I've been out for 8 years now and I still struggle to feel emotion. I tell people the best way to describe how I live my life to this day is thinking what I should be feeling instead of feeling what I should be feeling. And I've now been in therapy, pretty intensive therapy, almost weekly, since January, because in December, I had another quite severe mental breakdown, and first one I ever had after 8 years of exiting. And it's been kind of ongoing numbness for 8 years for me. And I just realized it, kind of had that peaking moment in December that I realized
Right.
what was happening. And I said, I don't want to live my life that way anymore. I want to be feeling what I should be feeling instead of just feeling like an observer of my own life. So yeah, I would agree definitely with that statement that it kind of becomes a blanketed response. You don't get to kind of pick and choose. Oh, I'll be happy, but I'll numb out the sadness. Like it's dissociation. It's universal. It's all encompassing. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing for sure. It's hard.
How long did you do the travel companion? So that's where you basically are with a one man for a period of a week or two, right?
Yeah.
And usually on a trip or something like that. Just quickly, what was that like, and how long did you do that for?
I would say that spanned for about 5 years, and I probably only did maybe 15 or 20 trips in total. I really struggled on those because even though it was nice to go somewhere for 4 days and come back with like $10,000-15,000, and half that time the man is at a conference or he's doing something else, like some kind of business thing. So I'd be alone. It was nice, but the hardest part for me was sleeping in a bed next to a sex buyer. because, you know, I didn't get my own room. I know some women say I
Right.
won't go on vacation unless they get me my own room. But again, I wanted to be the best. I wanted that man to always choose me to take,
Mm,
to give the money to. And so I would sleep next to them at night. I would, you know, just spend all my time basically with them instead of demanding a little bit of personal time. Like I need an hour or two to go do this or whatever. It was
right.
just, I gave everything I had to give. And I think that was the problem that left me with a lot of nothing at the end, except feeling like I'd given everything away. So yeah, I wasn't cut out for traveling with men. I did it, but every night I would lay there awake being like, I just want to be in my own bed. I would
Right.
rather stay with 50 men at the brothel than this one man for 3, 4 nights here. It's hard.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm guessing that's not something you anticipated. You probably thought, wow, this is easy money. I get to travel to a nice place and hang out in a nice hotel and have a bit of sex. And, you know, it's going to be relatively easy with one guy, right?
Yeah. But then therein comes that emotional requirement, right? In the brothel,
Yeah,
it's a little bit, but it's not much because they know like, oh, I only got 1 hour and then I'm out of
yeah.
here. So you're not
Oh,
getting into,
he's paying for the girlfriend experience, right?
yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's just it. On the trip, it is girlfriend experience 24/7.
yeah. Laugh at his jokes, smile, pretend that you think he's funny, pretend that you're interested when you're really not.
Yeah, it was very draining, you know. And
Yeah.
again, like I said, I'd rather stay with dozens of men in the brothel because it was short bursts. I could just take that guy, do what I had to do, and then move on. And he's done,
Mm,
he's gone. I've erased him. But the man who I was with the whole time, it was like this leech that you couldn't rip off your skin, you know, because they're
yeah.
there the whole time, and you're just counting down the hours till you can get on the plane and go home.
So Andrew, after 7 years, why and how did you get out?
Uh, I think for me, 5 years into selling sex, I hit the point where I realized that I was dissociating. I didn't know I was doing that prior to that. I just thought somehow things had gotten easier and gotten better. But then once I started doing post-secondary education and I was in my corrections diploma program, studying violence against women, some of those courses involve, you know, sexual exploitation, rape, human trafficking, just all that stuff. It started, every puzzle, the piece just kind of started falling into place. And I thought, this is me. Like I'm dissociating. I'm doing all these things
Mm,
for what?
mhm.
You know, for this house and this car. Like I can't take that with me when I die. I won't own this forever, but I'm gonna carry what I'm doing to myself and my body and my mind forever. So at 5 years, I recognized that I wanted to quit. But at that point, I owned a brothel and I had a lease,
You
a
owned
commercial.
your own brothel at that point?
Yeah, yeah, at that
Okay,
point. I'd only owned it maybe a year and a half, roughly at that point,
okay.
something like that. And instantly I just woke up one day and was like, I'm dissociating. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this, but I have an $80,000 lease outstanding. And if I collapse my business, I've lost, you know, over $100,000 that I spent renovating this lease space. And then
Oh,
also I had a 4-year lease contract, you know, a couple thousand a month, which would have been 80 grand that my landlord would have sued me for, which I didn't have the money saved because I had just built this brothel and put all this money in. So I would have had to pay that back, going back to operating out of other brothels or doing more travel trips or things. So
right,
I instantly just got to the point that I just started saying, okay, no, make a plan, get out of here. Like it might not happen overnight, but have a plan that gets you out. And my mentor, a woman, Kate Quinn, who is the executive director of CEASE here in Edmonton, the Center to End All Sexual Exploitation, she
okay.
often says there's many pathways in and very few out. And
Wow,
that was how I felt. I felt like I just kind of was shoved into the industry. And then once I was ready to quit, there was nothing there to help me do that. And no resources unless I was street exploited, because
right,
people saw what I was doing as work and they saw me as a very privileged person, and just thought, well, you can just quit. You can just quit, right? But the thing about just quitting is then you stop and you say to yourself, well, I just had sex with over 4,000 men for money. Why would I quit if I don't get where I want to get, you know? So then I just kind of did it for nothing. So that's kind of, I think, what keeps women going a lot longer is that they keep having that end vision in mind, but they're just not
right.
there yet. But they're not willing to sacrifice that end vision because that's what led them to doing what they're doing.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't have any counseling or anything like that, but really just reading exited women's work, particularly Rebecca Mott. She's a woman out of England.
I've heard of her. Yeah, from England.
Yeah,
Yes.
brilliant woman, brilliant. Like, and I remember just being at the brothel and going home, and I always talk about this, and I raced to my computer because every day she would write a new blog post, and I just was soaking up what she was reading and everything, or what she was writing, and everything was resonating with me, like just nailing it one after another. And at that point, I just couldn't be in denial anymore. So then that made it even worse, because then I'd be going to the brothel. I'm no longer able to dissociate because now I'm
Yeah,
fully
so
there.
conflicted, right?
Yeah, and I'm
Mhm.
looking at the men and, you know, doing things like that, like, oh, you're replicating trauma, or oh, you're talking down to me because you believe that women are subhuman. Like, it, everything, the whole tower just fell.
Wow.
But again, I couldn't find my way out. I had nobody to buy the brothel that wasn't, in my opinion, involved with trafficking. There was a lot of people who were, I think, involved with Asian trafficking that were trying to take the studio. So I could have sold it at any time, but I just, you know, I just couldn't do that. I just
Yeah.
felt like I would be hurting somebody even more. So then I actually, it always comes back to another guy, but then I actually fell in love with my now husband, who I
Wow.
went to high school with.
Oh,
So
neat. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
he was somebody that knew me beforehand. And so then obviously he kind of stepped into the relationship. I didn't want to lie to him, so I told him what I was doing because I learned from the first marriage.
Right.
And so he kind of said to me, I don't think what you're doing is healthy. I don't think it's good for you, for the men, for society. I think it's detrimental. I don't think this money is worth it. I think you just need to do what you need to do and walk away from it as soon as possible, which I appreciated because he didn't push me out. He didn't give me that ultimatum that was like, me now or that, you know,
Mm,
because I don't think I would have chosen. I couldn't financially, I was
mm.
bound. But in time, you know, you fall in love with somebody, and you know, there was one time a man picked me up at my house and was taking me on a trip. And my husband rides a motorcycle, and he had left 5 or 10 minutes before. I said, you need to leave. The buyer is coming to pick me up, and I'm going on this plane. So I'll just see you in 4 days whenever I get back. And so he left, and the buyer picked me up in a rental car to take me to the airport with him. And as we were leaving, 1 block from my house was my now husband. His motorcycle had broken down, and he was standing beside the motorcycle, and he saw me in this car with this buyer. And
Mm.
Paul, it was like slow motion. Like, it was literally like it took an hour for my car that I was in there to pass by him. And we just looked at each other, and he just stared at me and I just stared at him. And meanwhile, this buyer is driving the car, and he's like, blah, 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 talking. And
Right,
I don't hear anything he's saying. I just see my husband looking at me, and me being like, he knows I'm going to have sex with this man for
right.
4 days, even though I'm in love with him. And that was really the point where I just was like, I can't do it anymore. I just can't. And, you know, the stars aligned for me, and a woman who considers herself a fully autonomous sex worker. She bought the brothel from me, and she still owns it to this day, and she still sells sex out of it and everything. So, you know, had I wanted to sell it, no, I wanted to just collapse it and close it, but it wasn't an option. So I do feel like she was the best person to buy it. But I never will forget how I felt in that moment. And my husband and I, we've talked about it a couple times. He said that was torture, absolute torture, to see you drive
Wow.
with this guy. And that was kind of the make or break point. So at that point, she bought the brothel, and I had entered into university, and just was like, okay, I managed to save up $10,000 and just was like, I'm just going to give it a go and go from there. And luckily it all worked out so far.
Sounds like love brought you out.
Yeah, you know, I always kind of say, you know, it was love that kind of led me to the sex trade, because I just prioritized love and trying to give to a man and everything. But then it was love from a man.
I don't
That,
mean that kind of love that you said, though. I mean the love, relational, maybe
yeah,
sacrificial love from another man who had your best interest at heart.
yeah, the
That
right kind of
wasn't
love.
going to try to control you and give you the freedom to make that choice, but extended himself to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really neat. You know, like, again, it was still me prioritizing love with a man, but it was the right man this
The
time.
right man. Yes. And you're still with him, 3 kids.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Okay,
Yeah.
Andrea, love to keep talking, but I know that you have to go now. So I want to just thank
Great.
you so much again for taking the time to do this. maybe we can connect sometime down the road and continue the conversation. But, you know, thank you so much for your courage and your transparency and just being real about your experiences and sharing, and for bringing awareness to the reality of this. We didn't get into sex work as work and that whole talking point. I do apologize. We got a little sidetracked, but maybe that's a conversation for another time to talk about that. So thanks again. We'll wrap it up here, and you have a great day. Stay in touch.
Thanks, you too, Paul. I really appreciate it. And yeah, once my projects are all done and everything out, I'd love to come back and we'll do part 2.
Okay, sounds great. Bye.
Great.